Welcome to today's edition of the Career 100 podcast. Your host, Felicia Gopaul, founder of collegefundingresource.com, will be interviewing professionals each week currently working in one of the top careers. We want to expose you to the varied and distinguished careers of our guests and to perhaps inspire you into considering following in their footsteps. Or better yet, blaze your own trail. So sit back and relax as Felicia interviews professionals about how they came to be in the top careers.
This is a wonderful field with so many rich opportunities, and anything that you're interested, whether it's entertainment, whether it's culinary arts, whether it's cultural heritage, archives, working with people, working with students, working in a hospital, working in a corporation, there is a path for you in librarianship, and it's a great career and one that I hope you consider.
Hello and welcome back. This is your host, Felicia Gopaul, for the next installment of the Career 100 podcast. Today, we've got a guest representing one of my favorite professions, that of a librarian. So why is librarians one of my favorite professions? Well, I am a reader. I'm an avid reader. I often will read anywhere between 1 to 4 books a month. So I love books, and it is librarians who introduced me to different books. As a kid, you often will stay in the same genre, and a librarian goes, well, you might like this other book. And so that's what happened for me. And my brother was in town this weekend, and we read romance novels, we read mysteries, we read business books, we just read and read and read. And so it's just was so great. Let me introduce you to today's guest. Today's guest is Alexia Hudson-Ward, who is a tenured associate librarian at Penn State Abington College with responsibilities in reference, instruction, and emerging technology implementation. She's been the recipient of several professional honors, including being named Emerging Leader by the American Library Association, New Librarian of the Year, and Mover and Shaker. She served in a number of different leadership roles, including my and her sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Penn State University Libraries. She's currently serving on the executive board of the American Library Association and on the board of directors for the Pennsylvania Library Association. She's got a master's in library and information science from the University of Pittsburgh and a Bachelor of Arts from Temple University. It is my pleasure to introduce you to today's guest and my SOAR, Alexia Hudson-Ward. Welcome.
Yes, thank you so much, SOAR Felicia, and I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to you and to all the folks out there in Career 100 land. So thank you for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you so much. So I talked about why I love librarians. Did you have a similar path? Did somebody introduce you to books and that's how you became a librarian? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I always loved libraries and everything about it. So not just the books, but the actual physical spaces, the people who worked inside of them, the artwork, the cultural heritage artifacts that sometimes would be displayed in different libraries throughout my childhood. And so I just fell in love with everything libraries. But interestingly, I took a variety of different career paths before I became a librarian. And really, the catalyst for me to become a librarian was September 11, 2001. I was actually traveling on business that day. And having gone through that whole experience, like so many people, I was in a space where I started to reevaluate really what I wanted to do with my life and my career. It really put me in a space to think about the future and think about serving people in a meaningful way. So I did a pro-con analysis and came up, everything pointed back to librarianship. And so that started the path for me in terms of actually being a librarian, because I've worked as a journalist and my most recent career before I came into librarianship was I was working as a customer marketing manager for the Coca-Cola company. But when I reflect back to my earliest years or some of my earliest memories, and they were with librarians. So without a doubt, having really outstanding school librarians made a huge difference. They really introduced me to the passion and love of it, along with my mother and grandmother.
Excellent, excellent. So, one of the things that you said that I think is an important thing for students to understand is the path to a new career is not necessarily linear. And so you talked about the fact that you worked for the Coca-Cola companies before you became a librarian, and it was really, out of looking at yourself after September 11th that you really started to kind of reevaluate and go and explore the opportunity to become a librarian. And I think that that's an important thing for students to consider, because when you're first out of college, you think that whatever you majored in is what you're going to do for the rest of your life. Those of us who've got a little gray hairs, we realize that, it's very rarely going to be like that, especially now in today's day and age.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are very few people who can really speak to a linear trajectory from a career standpoint. And a lot of folks that are in librarianship, this is actually their second or third career. And so it is not uncommon to run across people who have been in a variety of different fields or a variety of different career paths prior to coming to librarianship. And all of those experiences, quite frankly, help to enrich my colleagues and my ability to be able to share robust knowledge from an information perspective. So whether they are electronic resources or they are print resources, what we bring the totality of our experience to librarianship, which is why I think so many people fall in love with librarians, because we're pretty much relatable and can relate to anyone.
Got it. So when I was introducing you, we talked about the fact that you've got responsibilities in reference and instruction, as well as emerging technology implementation. To me, that is a little bit broader, the way that I think of a library and what sorts of things that they do. So when people are asking you for help, what problems are they trying to solve for themselves?
Well, I'm an academic librarian, and one of the things that I often like to share with students is that no different than the medical field, where you have anesthesiologists and obstetricians, gynecologists, dermatologists, people who are very specialized but still carry the general title doctor. The same applies with librarians. And so in my case, my constituents are primarily college students of all ages and all majors. And so typically when they come to me with the question, the catalyst is usually one of two things. It's a course-related assignment where they need some assistance in terms of getting qualified resources, and or they are also seeking information about careers or companies that they're wanting to research to determine whether or not those are appropriate places that they should go for internships or, to just do some additional investigative work. And so what comes out of sometimes these course-related assignments is that we also try to make sure that they are incorporating the latest technologies. So just like you and I are having these conversations on Skype, I frequently do reference consultations either on Skype. I do them in Facebook and Twitter. In the past, when Second Life was real hot, I met students inside of Second Life and helped them with some work as well. And so it really varies in terms of what specific questions they are, but they generally fall along those two chords, and or it is something related to them seeking some information about a career path.
So let me kind of step back and ask, are there any myths or misconceptions about being a librarian? I mean, certainly the librarian with the hair pulled back in a bun myth, I assume, is no longer valid. But are there any other kind of myths or misconceptions about being a librarian that people have?
Yeah, well, it's funny you would say that. The bun, older white woman with glasses, shushing is still a very prevalent stereotype. In fact, I was just watching, I think it was a Doritos commercial or something over the holidays. And the librarian, there were students or something fighting in the library, but they were fighting quietly. And so everybody that was coming into the library, including the fire department, everything was all shushing each other. And the librarian very much fit the physical stereotype. So that physical stereotype is very real, that we are all little older white ladies with buns pulled back and glasses, severely shushing people. Some of the other stereotypes that I find to still be very prevalent is that we are still considered to be just repositories for books. And so I'm often asked by people who are uninformed, well, isn't your job going to go away? I mean, we have Google, and we're like, well, Google's been around for quite some time. And in fact, no, our jobs aren't going to go away. We actually have a partnership with Google. So this whole notion that we are 100% solely and wholly focused just on print materials. The other stereotype is that anybody can be a librarian. Essentially, you can walk off the street and sit at the desk and ask questions. Like, it's not that hard of a position. And people are often surprised to find, students in particular, are surprised to learn that myself and many of my colleagues are required to have a master's degree in library or library and information science from an ALA accredited institution, and that we routinely go to our professional annual conference at least once a year, but oftentimes twice a year, to ramp up on our skills and particularly our digital librarianship skills. So I would say those are definitely some of the prevalent stereotypes that are out there, and that we're not specialized. And so a librarian is a librarian is a librarian. So whether it's the public library, whether it's the school library, and that's one of the challenges we're facing with some of our politicians now, is they're under the impression that a lot of our public library colleagues, librarians, are equipped to do the same work as K through 12 school librarians. And that has unfortunately resulted in the elimination of some school libraries and school librarians. And now we're starting to see the data come through that, in fact, students perform better when there is a school librarian present and when they actually have engagement with the school librarian and do library specific activities. And so all of the assessments and the research data is now coming to prove that. And so I would say that was one of the other stereotypes as well, is that all libraries function the same, all librarians have the same skill sets as well.
You know, my daughter is currently working on her National History Day project, and she's having to spend a lot of time going and finding information as part of that. And I think that as part of that process, she's really gotten to see the power of a librarian in helping her to come up with information. Like, she's accessing information in Washington, D.C., and we're in California, and, you know, in other libraries kind of across the nation for her project, so that she's got good source material, not just the younger her would have just tried to find whatever was available at the local library and just be limited to what was happening at the local library. But there is so much information that is out there. I would imagine that one of the tasks of a librarian is helping students or whoever is looking for the information find the information that they need, because it's out there, you know, and oftentimes it's a librarian who can point you in the direction that will tell you how to find the information you're looking for.
Absolutely. And I would say, Felicia, that one of the most fun projects or things that I've ever worked on is helping students uncover what we refer to as hidden collections, which are collections that are held in like repositories, like historical repositories, the Library of Congress, the Schomburg, et cetera, where they're holding the papers and or cultural artifacts of some historic figure, but they're not necessarily things that are in the circulating collection, but one can inquire about them and use them for research purposes. And so it has just been delightful to see students' eyes just illuminate when they have come across the original diary of someone who was living in Philadelphia as a free Black person in the 1800s, you know, to see the joy in their face when they get an opportunity to read the papers of a president, the private papers of the president, of any specific president. And so that is one of the other really fun aspects, I would say, about librarianship, as well as that it can take you into so many different places. And without question, illuminating so-called hidden collections is a big part of what we do, exposing students to both print and digital resources that they wouldn't necessarily have at their immediate disposal.
Absolutely. So if you had the opportunity to go back and talk to a young Alexia and give her advice, what advice would you go back and tell yourself, knowing what you know now after the time that you've been in librarianship?
Well, I would definitely tell the young Alexia, don't let people tell you you don't look like a librarian, because that was a big driver in me not making the decision to go directly from undergraduate into a master's in library science program, because in fact, I had been thinking about it for quite some time, but people said, you don't look like a librarian. And quite frankly, the peer group that I was around at the time was pretty dismissive of librarians. Well, with the internet, you know, the job is going to go away. And so don't you want to have a more robust career path? So I would tell young Alexia, definitely go ahead and do librarianship, dive right in immediately. You would enjoy it immensely, and you would get to see the change of what has transpired from our shift from print to digital over time, because I'm now experiencing it kind of as the onslaught, whereas my colleagues who are of the same age but had done librarianship since like the early to mid 90s, they have gotten to see just an incredible shift in how users use information, how librarians teach users how to use information, and how to uncover and discover information from a digital perspective.
You know, going back and thinking about that conversation with my older brother who was visiting, you know, it was funny because he was very dismissive of the fact that my oldest daughter really likes to hold a book. She loves to hold a book. And so, you know, she's walking around with her books in her hand. And he was just like, I thought everybody, which is always, you know, a way to know that you are really on the wrong path. But I thought everybody was using Kindles or their computer in order to access information. But there's a lot of information that is still really only accessible kind of in the paper form.
And, you know, it's funny because everything that's old is new. And so I think when e-readers first came out and they were real hot and sexy and those who could afford them ran out and got them. But, you know, if you travel, you got to cut the thing off when you're taxiing and when you're taking off and landing on an airplane. It has to be charged all the time. You have to have batteries, you know, or at least a robust battery life for that particular device. And some of the earlier devices, you know, had some technical challenges in terms of being able to increase the font. You couldn't dog ear the page. It was difficult to bookmark them, all those types of things. But interestingly, some studies have just come out to show that print books are back on the rise. So now people have stopped using e-readers and have started using more print books. Hudson News and a couple of other bookstore chains that are very prevalent, like in travel spaces, like in airports and in train stations, they actually offer lending programs and borrowing programs for books. And so if you return a book, you get 50% off or 100% off, depending on the condition of the book. And then you get to borrow another book and drop it off. And I found that so incredibly fascinating. There is a Facebook fan page called The Reading Room, and they often put up these very cute cartoons. And so one of the cartoons had a iPad threatening a physical book. And the iPad said, you know, I can just light this candle and burn you up, you know, and you'll just be gone and no one will think anything about you. And the book just listened to him. And so he kept putting these threats out. You're going to be obsolete and no one cares about you. And so the book just reached over and hit the iPad on top of his head just to cut him off. That was so delightful, but it's very much the truth. I think if you're a hardcore bibliophile, and I would put myself in that category, I think there's something about the physical book that still is very attractive. It's still something really neat about turning the pages. There's also a recent medical study that just came out, I want to say maybe 2 weeks ago, that now suggests that one shouldn't read e-readers before trying to go to bed, that it disrupts your REM sleep patterns. And that if you want to read, you should read a physical book. So I found that very interesting, too. So I don't see the physical book going anyplace anytime soon. They've been around since 2600 BC. We're still waiting to see what the exact life cycle of tablets are going to be. It looks like it's starting to wane off. So, we'll see what happens. But I always find that funny when people are like, what do you read a physical book for? Or doesn't everybody have e-readers? And no, everyone doesn't. There's a lot of cost associated to having a Wi-Fi, as you know, to having a Wi-Fi subscription to be able to use these e-readers as well. They can be rather cost prohibitive, but the book one time, and then you can't share it with anybody. You only have the license to use it for that device for you. But if you want to loan a friend or a family member the book, you can always do that with the physical book. It's much easier. So I see them going any place, anytime soon, Felicia.
Got it. So, Alexia, what gets you up in the morning to do your job? I can hear the passion in your voice as you talk about being a librarian. Tell me a little bit about what gets you up in the morning.
What gets me up in the morning is the discovery of new knowledge and information. I literally learn something new every day. And quite frankly, I cannot, and I reflected on this in preparation for this interview, I can't quite frankly think of another time in my career where I literally learned something new every day, and so that's what really gets me up in the morning is that I love to learn. I definitely describe myself as a lifelong learner. And so what makes me passionate is like, I'm gonna learn something new today. I'm going to leave today transformed. And so that's what really gets me going. Definitely.
Yeah, because you have no idea when you start your day what somebody's going to ask you that's going to lead you onto a new path that you've never explored before.
Right. Or what technological challenge a student may face with a particular device. You know, they're coming onto campus, or at least my campus, with an average of 4 devices. So they have a mobile phone, they have a laptop, they have a tablet PC, and then they usually have some type of Bluetooth or some headphone piece so that they can listen to various materials or videos or etc. And every day somebody has a technological problem that oftentimes will take me out of my traditional realm of learning. So whether it's just, a question regarding something course related, like, I really need help with this particular assignment, and I'm trying to think about what are the best resources that I can use for this assignment to get the best grade possible. Or I'm having these technological challenges, can you help me negotiate them? I have no idea what I'm going to face, and it makes it exciting, definitely.
So is there anything that keeps you up at night, by contrast?
Yes. What keeps me up at night, and I'm glad that at least, social media on some levels is starting to address it. In its infancy, both Facebook and Twitter allow people to basically commandeer other people's knowledge without attribution. And so you could take information from the New York Times, from the Washington Post, from a friend, from CNN, and post it on your page as if it was your knowledge. I know for a fact that several of my colleagues had a conversation with principals at Facebook. And then also Twitter started to do the same thing, where now there is the little via piece, so if you go on to someone else's page to share something, they get attribution. And that's the thing that really troubles me with students. We have a lot of students and a lot of people in general who plagiarize and or commandeer other people's knowledge and try to appropriate it as their own. And so we spend at Penn State University a lot of time talking to students about academic integrity and the importance of making sure that you give attribution. But, when we release them to the wild and they go off in the world, it seems like every quarter, Ben Carson being the most recent prominent individual, every quarter you hear somebody plagiarizing. And it worries me to death, because I know how challenging it is for someone to derive concepts and then to share those concepts. And so for them to not be given credit for that really bothers me. And so that keeps me up at night.
Is there anything, Alexia, that's changing in your industry that someone who is just getting started needs to be aware of? You talked about, first and foremost, that oftentimes this is a second or perhaps third career. Is there anything else that's changing in your industry?
Well, we tend to have shifts, no different than other fields, as it relates to what are the most relevant or important or critical pieces. And so what's really starting to rise to the surface now, and this is another piece that I'm excited I'll be taking on, or I have taken on in my place of business, is user experience and assessment. And so now, as things have started to level out, it's interesting because every library, every type of library in the United States, according to some Pew Internet studies and some other general studies that have been conducted by Library Journal magazine, all of our patron counts, our gate counts went up. And so while physical circulating material leveled off, or in some aspects decreased, the number of people who have come into our physical spaces has dramatically increased. The number of individuals who come into all of our physical spaces, be they academic, public, special libraries, to use computers increased. And we're talking about over a 3 to 5 year period. And so now what that has required us on some levels to do in librarianship is to really think about the user's experience once they come inside, because clearly they have thought of the space in ways that we haven't thought of the space. And so even in academic libraries, we seem to see more socializing of students in the library, which, I tell them all the time, back in the old ye days when I went to school, we did not socialize in the library. Like, that was not the place to do it. But they do. There's much more collaborative work that's being required from the faculty for students. And so they gather together, but they also just gather together just to hang out and talk to each other. That is a trend that has been consistent as well with public libraries. People just come to gather. It seems to be a free, safe, comfortable space where you can kind of formulate community. And so as a result, we're now really critically examining what the user experience looks like from a context of doing eye tracking studies all the way down to assessing everything that we do. So whether they are educational programs that we offer to students or to the general public, whether they are assessing whether or not our collections are really reflective of our specific communities and making sure that we are doing culturally competent collection selection, that even when we are loaning out technology, that there's also some consideration for our constituents as well, making sure that we are accessible to individuals who may be both physically and visually impaired. And while we were always doing that, there's more of a centralized focus on it. So that's the big thing that I would say is changing, is definitely this focus on user experience and assessment.
So I have a really good friend. She lives in South Central LA. So, a lot of the kids are kind of latchkey kids. And so what she was noticing is that she would take her daughter to the library, and then there would be these other kids. And she's not of the persuasion to just let kids be. So she's going to go and talk to them. What's going on? What are you doing? Are you doing your homework? I mean, that's just who she is. And so what she ended up doing, and her library adapted, was putting in a study program so that it became a comfortable place. And parents now know that she'll be there, the library will be there, and the kids can come and do their homework. And what it really struck me about that whole thing is she just adopted it because that's who she is. And then the library saw that, this is a need because people are doing it whether or not we're acknowledging it or not. And then put in place a formalized program to honor what she was doing, as well as she also started a book club inside of the library. So she had these kids, you do your homework and then we're going to work on, this is the book we're working on, and everybody's got to read the book and everybody's got to participate, and she's got them writing papers and she's got them doing all sorts of stuff inside of that. And so, I think that's a big change from the way it was when I first started using libraries. I live in a community that has got a large Asian population, and so I know that it's got Chinese books and it's got Korean books, and then it's got programs for people who are learning the language that you can come in and use the library. And I mean, it seems that a lot of the functions and usability that you were just talking about really is, at the best laid libraries, is really indicative of who comes to the library. I definitely noticed that, there's a lot more talking going on. There's a lot more studying going on. People use it as a central place. If somebody needs tutoring help, let's come to the library. We'll all meet at the library, and everybody knows where the library is, and we'll take over a table and I'll tutor you. And it's just a nice, safe place to do that. And it's fascinating to think about it in relationship to the way that it was when I was growing up. It was a quiet place. You got your library book. You sat quietly for a while. Then you took out, your ton of library books and you went home.
Yes. And I think what Americans have told us, because, there are different kind of cultural etiquettes and protocols to using libraries internationally. But what Americans have demonstrated to us is that when community centers are gone, when other social hubs are not available or accessible in the same way, when bookstores, physical bookstore chains start closing, we will still find a space and a place to have community. And the libraries across the country have been those places to have community, regardless as to what their configurations are. So I'll give you an example, what their specializations are. We have a repository. I'm in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So we have a repository here, the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. And when I was a child, first of all, kids weren't really welcome there. I mean, it was really like a place for people that were doing doctoral studies, or postdoc work. And, it was very much kind of a traditional scholar type of library. Over the past, I would say 20, 25 years, it has now really become a completely different place. They actually offer genealogy workshops. They open up their hidden collections to the general public and do fun things. Like recently they did a beer tasting party based on recipes that they have in the repository going back to like the 1700s. So they envisioned these old recipes and then had people come out for Philadelphia Beer Week. And I just thought that was so, and I do still believe that is so neat. And so I think in many ways, people have required us, the general public and students on college campuses, have required us to be a space, a social hub. And I think none of us had anticipated that, because I think in a lot of ways we still think of the function of the library, and this is my colleagues, we still think of the function of the library largely as an academic type of piece. And so whether it's a public library, you're coming there to study, to do some work. You know, if it's an academic library, you're coming there to get some course related work out, you know, and so on and so forth. So I think we've always thought of it in academic terms, like this is some place you came to get certain things accomplished with certain resources. But I would say over the past 20, 25 years, it has definitely shifted more towards cultural experiences, celebrating different cultures, and really being responsive to the needs of the community in ways that we, quite frankly, were not trained or had anticipated to do. When the economy bottomed out, a lot of my public library colleagues actually started taking classes on resume development and interview skills, because people were literally coming into the library, had been working at a particular place almost their entire adult life, now laid off. They have no idea how to put together a resume. They have no idea how to put together a cover letter. They have no idea how to even start a conversation around how do I begin to network for a particular position. And so that was a beautiful thing to see happen. And from a political standpoint, it really showed the value of libraries as well to our politicians and to other people who may have been questioning the relevance of these large physical spaces across the country.
Yeah. It's an intriguing conversation, and one that I could probably speak on for a number of years, actually. But let me just kind of change the subject for a second. Why do you think that being a librarian is on the list of the top 100 careers?
Well, I think for one, there is the idea that you can be in this field for as long as you want to. And in fact, I was just looking at some information. The university librarian for Fisk University, Jessie Carney Smith, was the first African-American woman to earn a PhD in library and information science from the University of Illinois, is still gainfully employed at 84 years old. And so I think that's a big reason why, is that this is not, we're not considered a career where, you're done at 55, and you got to go. And so I think people see longevity as a big piece of it. I also think that there is a romanticism around librarianship that's precipitated by how librarians and libraries are perceived through popular culture programming. And so, as you may be aware of, TNT has now restarted their series, The Librarians. Now it's a sci-fi show. It's really cute, but it's all around, these librarians solving these international mysteries. But then we've also had people who are not necessarily librarians, but are very library friendly, such as Brad Metzger, who does a series of shows on the History Channel and History 2 around lost history. And he always shouts out libraries and librarians, prominently features archivists. The same applies with Henry Louis Gates and the work that he does with genealogy. You may have seen some of his series where I think the series is called Do You Know Who You Think You Are, or Who Do You Think You Are? And so if you notice, part of the pattern of discovery around how one learns about their particular genealogical track is by going to the library and meeting with several archivists. And so I would have to say that has played a prominent role. And I also have to give credit to the New York Times, who has routinely done some very interesting stories featuring librarians and kind of shattering the stereotypes. And in fact, I want to say it was early last year, they did a story on records management and how that is something one should consider. And they talked extensively about the necessity of people going to get either master's in library and information science, specializing in archives or digital libraries, because we're going to need people to manage all the content that's being created in both print and digital formats. So I would say it's the sum total of all of those reasons why librarianship remains one of the top 100 professions.
Got it. Alexia, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with us?
Yes. And well, first, again, I'd like to thank you so much for inviting me. This has been a really enjoyable conversation, and I appreciate you taking time out of what I know is your busy schedule as well to invite me on. So thank you again. And what I would say to students is that this is a wonderful field with so many rich opportunities, and anything that you're interested in doing, you can find a place for it in librarianship. Literally last year, a job came across my desk where you could have been the librarian for the royal family. That's real cool. Last year, another job came across my desk where you could be the librarian for the Culinary Institute of America. And so anything, any specialization, anything that you're interested in, I mean, Disney, whether it's entertainment, whether it's culinary arts, whether it's cultural heritage, archives, working with people, working with students, working in a hospital, working in a corporation, there is a path for you in librarianship, and it's a great career and one that I hope you consider.
Absolutely. So if somebody wanted to get more information on your profession or get a hold of you, how would they go about doing that, Alexia?
Well, they're more than welcome to email me at my Penn State email address, which is A as in Apple, IH, the number 3, at psu.edu. And then in terms of learning more about the profession, scholarship opportunities, learning more about the field in general, I would definitely encourage students and others to look at the American Library Association's website, which is ala.org. And within there, you'll find loads and loads of information, much of which is open access, where you'll be able to learn more about the field. You'll be able to learn more about this wonderful professional association, some of the work that we do, and then also some scholarship opportunities as well.
Great. So longtime listeners will know that I will include to this podcast, you will know that on my website, College Funding Resource, I will have links to Alexia's email as well as links to the American Library Association website so that you can come in, look at our show notes and get directed to those two resources. So, Alexia, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the line with me and telling me all about the profession. And I say this almost every time I do these interviews. It's a pleasure for me to talk to people who love what they do.
Thank you. And thank you again for the invitation. This has been awesome.
Thank you. So if you need additional information about college funding, I invite you to visit our website at College Funding Resource. If you like this podcast, please go to our iTunes channel and leave a positive review. And I invite all of our listeners today and in the future, please keep coming back to the Career 100 podcast to hear more guests like Alexia who have valuable and interesting information to share about their chosen profession.
Thank you for listening to today's edition of the Career 100 podcast. If you would like more information about planning and saving for college, please visit our site at www.collegefundingresource.com. That's www.collegefundingresource.com. This is Kathy Davis for the Career 100 podcast.